Ni hao. It's quite a lot of applause for one single word. I wish I knew more. It's my routine to always take a photograph of my audience before I begin. Do you mind? There's a reason behind this. I'll tell you in a second. You there, you're not smiling. Smile for me. This side, I haven't forgot about you. The reason I do this is in case someone wants to kill me before the presentation is over, we'll have photographic evidence. So you've been warned. I always knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. Now that's not completely true. There were two things that I wanted to be when I grew up. The first one was to be a professional basketball player, to be a point guard for the Los Angeles Lakers. You can see how that one worked out. The second, however, was to be a foreign correspondent. That seemed to fit my personality and my height a little bit more. The reason I wanted to be a foreign correspondent is because I was very shy as a kid. I'm still very shy right now. It's difficult to come up and speak to you in front of this very big and powerful audience and share my stories. But when I had a camera in my hand, it was so much easier. Plus, it was much easier to meet girls that way as well. I had a reason. Can I take your picture? And I liked the job so much and wanted to do it so badly. I remember seeing photographs of amazing war correspondents from Vietnam, Eugene Smith, Eddie Adams, Nick Utt, all of those photographs, and they meant so much to me. And I wanted to do the job myself. And so I went to my hometown newspaper, and I said, hire me, I'm a photographer. I'm a reporter, I can do this job. Surprisingly, they did. They did hire me. But there was one small thing I forgot to tell them, my age. I lied about it. I said that I was 16 years old when I was only 15 years old. They needed me to drive to my assignments, but I didn't have a car. I didn't even have a driver's license. So that wasn't going to stop me, though. I got on my bicycle and I pedaled with my camera on my neck, and I took the pictures that I needed to take. And from the very first shot that I ever took for the newspaper in my hometown of 6,000 people in Geneva, Ohio, I was smitten. It was the job that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And fortunately, I've been able to do that. But I haven't forgotten the past. In fact, I don't want you to forget it either. So here is a picture of my first press card and my high school afro. Looks a little bit different. How times have changed. A few more wrinkles, a few more gray hairs. But I have not lost my love for journalism. Now, since that time when I was 15 years old, a lot has changed. The kind of events that I used to cover as a young photographer were pretty lighthearted stuff. Community meetings, occasionally there might be a fire in the local town. But from that time, I went on to cover conflict. All of these photographs represent kind of the trajectory of my career. The very first war that I went to, and the very last one. As you can see here, in the far left-hand corner, I don't look that different from the 15-year-old that you saw in the press pass. That was my first war in 1986. Don't try to do the math. That was in Nicaragua. The very last one, on the far right-hand corner, is in Iraq, and I'm with a group of Kurdish Peshmerga, who at that time in 2014 were fighting the Islamic State and who are still fighting the Islamic State. In between are all the different wars that I've had a chance to cover and witness. Now I'm going to tell you a dirty little secret about war coverage, and it's this. It's the easiest kind of journalism that anybody can do. The very easiest. I mean, yes, you can get killed, there is danger, but in terms of the job itself, incredibly easy. I'll tell you why. Because we as people, we're drawn to the dramatic, we're drawn to the exciting. We want to see the things that are interesting. For instance, if you had your choice as a young journalist to cover a city council meeting or a village council meeting, or to cover a fire, you'd want to cover the fire. Why? Because people are drawn to that. We're like zombies. We want to see where the action is. And in some cases, war is the very same thing. Any monkey with a camera can take a picture of an explosion. Perhaps that's why I've done it so long in my career. But unfortunately, I don't feel it's the right way. And I feel that only covering combat has been a huge weakness in my own personal journalism, but also in journalism as a whole, how we do this job. We have to do it better. And in this time period, I hope to have evolved from just focusing on combat to covering the entire war, what causes it, who are the real victims behind the conflicts. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the presentation. But what I'd like to show you now is one of my first real ethical dilemmas in covering conflict. I'll set this video up for you. At this point, it's 2001, and this is northern Afghanistan. And I've been sent by an American network named NBC to cover the conflict in Afghanistan at this point, which is really about Northern Alliance guerrillas fighting to overthrow the Taliban government. You may remember that the Taliban at one time controlled all of Afghanistan. They were the proper government, if you will. But at this time, the US was beginning to get involved in that conflict because in 2001, as you may remember, there were terrorist attacks against the United States, which resulted in the Afghan war, going after Al-Qaeda and their Taliban hosts in Afghanistan. This particular video is a fight between the Taliban and the Northern Alliance. I'm with the Northern Alliance in a trench position near a tank. When the Taliban fire position, here's what happens next. Wow, that was close. The Taliban fired a mortar shell that landed very close to me, maybe no more than 20 feet from me. It exploded, and some of the shrapnel hit a National Geographic producer that was standing right next to me.
Get on this side. Get on the other side. Let's get on the other side of the tank. Back there. Other side. Other side.
That's kind of a dramatic moment, I think you'd agree. And it was interesting for me because there's more going on there than meets the eye, what you just see here. This particular incident was the first time I actually saw a casualty in war, someone getting hurt. I'd seen a lot of people shooting somewhere else, but not a lot of shooting coming back in our position. This was the first time that I'd actually seen that. This also created one of my first professional ethical dilemmas, and that ethical dilemma was this. I have a camera, yet I have a wounded colleague standing directly across from me. Do I continue to videotape, or do I put the camera down and help him? Obviously, you know the answer to what I did here. I actually continued to videotape. He seemed to be okay at the time. I knew enough about first aid that I knew that this wasn't a femoral artery that had been hit. A femoral artery, some of you pre-med or medical students in here know that someone has that artery cut, they can bleed out and die in as little as 4 minutes. But there's a telltale sign of that. The blood spurts from the wound. This wasn't the case. He actually said to me, "Hey, I'm bleeding, shoot me." I said, "Looks like you've already been shot." But I continued to roll my video camera, got the video, then put the camera down, took his scarf, and I wrapped him up. Now, to me, I thought it was important to do that. Yet, later on, some of my colleagues criticized me. They said, "Why did you continue to shoot when he was wounded? Why didn't you help? Why didn't you put your camera down?" That's a question a lot of times people ask of journalists. Why don't you put your camera down and help? Well, in this particular instance, what I saw in front of me, I thought was important. It was something that many viewers hadn't seen before. What it looks like when hard, hot metal meets soft human flesh. This is what had been absent very much in the war coverage that we had been seeing in America for a number of years. This is what it looked like when people bled. I wanted to make sure people saw that. I didn't want him to die, of course, but I thought that was an important moment. And so to this day, I feel like I did the right thing, that it was important to get that information out there. People needed to see what the true cost of war was. Now, as time went on, the battles that I saw grew increasingly more violent, like this one in Fallujah in 2004. That particular piece of footage got a lot of play on the American networks. You know why? It was because it was dramatic. It was because it had that inherent drama that we as viewers are drawn to. Now, that particular battle didn't make much difference in the war. No battles really make much difference in wars. I have to tell you that. That's what I've learned in my time in the field. But that got a lot of play. All the networks carried it. And yet, this piece of video that I'm about to show you now, from the same battle, did not get the same kind of coverage. I think you'll see why. You can understand why that did get the same coverage, yes? That perhaps him in the head. He didn't die from that, but that was the result. You saw that it pierced his helmet and caused brain damage. He's not been the same since. But that kind of footage didn't quite get the same kind of coverage on the networks that the previous coverage did because it was incoming fire. We saw the results of what happened again when hot metal met soft human flesh. Now, the most powerful piece of video that I captured during my time as a war correspondent, period, again, came out of the same war in Iraq. Yet this one wasn't so much violence that was going around us. It wasn't necessarily gunfire, and it wasn't necessarily someone getting wounded. What it was a young Lance Corporal Marine who had just killed 6 insurgents. He had been involved in a gun battle in a Fallujah mosque. He had fired his weapon, and he killed 6 men. When I met him outside shortly afterwards, he started to talk about the incident, about what had happened, and he was filled with adrenaline, very excited in some ways, excited, a little bit scared, kind of what you'd feel after something almost very dangerous happens to you. If you've ever been in a car accident or if you've ever had a close call, that kind of adrenaline is still there, and he was talking about what it was like to shoot the guys and how he felt. Over the course of time, I stayed with him for about 2 or 3 hours. That feeling changed, the adrenaline ebbed, and what happened was a more reticent, more contemplative young soldier that starts to talk about how he felt about killing those men and how he might change when he went back to the US. Would he be the same person? You'll see several different clips of this, and it's got music and some text over it. It was used to promote one of my books, but you'll be able to hear him in between those.
I just want to be normal. I want to live a normal life.
Do you think you can after this?
I'm sure I'll be all right. This place it'll make you pretty hard. It'll give you some thick skin. Tired of that too. The more I kill here, the less I got to worry about coming into my country. I don't know if I could do another tour over here. The more time you spend here, the more people you want to kill. Right now, I'm so sick of tearing up my buddies. I just want to kill them all. The more time you spend here, the more time you just want to just want to get in there and kill them.
I think when you go home, you'll be able to turn it off.
I hope so. I really do. My fiance's really worried I'm not going to come back the same. I'll never tell her what things I did here. I'll never tell anybody. I'm not proud of killing people. I'm just proud to serve my country. I never understood it until I got here, you know? I can't stand it.
It's hard to do this.
It's not hard to kill people, it's hard not to get killed. My company's got so many casualties, it's not even funny.
Yeah, especially this event. This event's a lot of casualties.
Hey, we're pushing!
So much different from the conflict videos that I showed you just previous to this. It was him talking about what he was going through. And in some ways, this reflects two very important points for me that I learned as a journalist and that I tried to pursue after this moment in my career when I witnessed what was going on here, that we were not seeing enough of this. This is very difficult to get, by the way. Soldiers, after they've come back to the base after something like this, don't really want to talk about these events. You know, he was willing to do it while I was with him, you know, fresh after this firefight. But two things happened there. One, he revealed the killing mechanism that is enabled in most soldiers and Marines in any army around the world that I've identified as the fatal feedback loop. I teach a class at the University of Hong Kong now called Killing Stories, and it's about how we kill in war. This is one of the areas I talk about, the fatal feedback loop. What this means is that when we train our soldiers, regardless of whether it's in China, in Israel, in Colombia, or the United States, we bring young men and women together, we put them in very difficult situations, we call it boot camp training, where they form very personal, very strong bonds. In some ways, these bonds have been identified as perhaps stronger than even family bonds, the bond of brothers, maybe even stronger than the bonds of husband and wife. And then we take these young men and women and we put them in danger. They may be fighting an enemy that they have no problem with. Maybe they don't even know who they are. Maybe they're not clear of the reason that they're fighting. And yet something happens. One of them is killed. And so the revenge mechanism is set into motion. This person who had no problem with the enemy initially now has a problem because he's lost his friend. He'd been killed in battle, just like William Wall told us. So many of my friends were killed, I just want to kill every one of them. That's not anecdotal. This is data that's been looked at. There is a mechanism and a reason for doing this. This allows people to kill that perhaps didn't want to kill in the past. Now they have a reason to avenge their friends, to avenge their brothers. So that's the process. But this video convinced me that I needed to cover war in a different way. How I needed to cover it was to get past the body count, to get past the gunfire, to look at war through a human lens, a different perspective. And my answer to that was to leave the networks, to get out of television news and join the internet. And I did. And I pitched Yahoo, the giant internet portal, to do a project called Kevin Sites in the Hot Zone. The project was this, that I would cover every war in the world in 1 year. The idea would be not to go with a big crew, but to go alone, only with the gear in my backpack, to make a small footprint, not to change the environment. There was other reasons to go as well. Most importantly, to put a human face on those conflicts and to do multimedia storytelling using text, video, and still photography, not separately, but all together, delivered on the most powerful medium in the world, the internet, and to tell the story of conflict. In the process of doing that, we also realized that we had to approach storytelling in a different way as well. We had to approach storytelling from a smaller perspective, to talk to the individuals, the child soldiers, the amputees, the mothers who had lost daughters to terrorist violence, the Maoist guerrillas, to talk to them individually and not to try to tell the entire story, but to tell their story. And through those individual small stories, when strung together, perhaps the larger picture of war would finally emerge. How would we do it? Well, technically, things were fairly easy at that point. With the advent of smaller digital video capture technology, I could go into the field with a small camcorder, with my laptop computer, and with a BGAN satellite modem that you see before you that allowed me to get an internet connection anywhere in the world, whether it was in Somalia or whether it was in the deserts of Iraq. And what was most important was all that information, all that technology would fit in my backpack, and I could carry it with me. So the ideas of journalism were the same. Tell a narrative story about human beings, but do it in a way that captures the truth, not with a big crew of people, but as an individual armed with new technology. That was the goal. This is what my kit looked like when I would go out into the field. As you can tell, it's very small. On the right-hand side, my personal items, maybe 3 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, all kind of quick-dry material that could be washed out in a river if I needed to. Broad-spectrum antibiotics if I got sick. On the left-hand side, you can see the technology that I used, digital still cameras, digital video cameras, fold-flat tripod. That was all for production work, capturing the images, and then the laptop to actually post-production, to do the editing, to do the writing, and eventually to connect that to a modem and to transmit the stories. In the back, personal protection gear, Kevlar helmet, a body armor vest, all of that would fit in a duffel bag. Now what happened, depending on where I was at, you would have to dress very differently for the environment. A lot of times I would embed with the military, sometimes American military, sometimes guerrilla forces, it didn't matter. But when I did that, I dressed similar to the way that they did, not because I wanted to be identified as them, but I knew that they would come under attack. So I needed to have the same kind of protection, the body armor, the helmet. But very often, I was with the population. I didn't want to be dressed like a soldier. I didn't want to be identified as a soldier. So in Afghanistan, I would put on my shalwar kameez, my pakul, grew my beard out a little bit, and even though I couldn't necessarily pass on close inspection for an Afghani, from distance, I didn't draw a lot of attention. You know, perhaps maybe in a car, people would just take a look at me and just think I was another Afghan man. So that allowed me to work fairly easily that way. The trouble came in when those two worlds collided. Sometimes I would be dressed as an Afghan and I would run into the military. In this particular case, a US military convoy got stuck on the road and I was taking photographs, and there was a young 18-year-old soldier that got out of the machine gun turret and he said, "Hey, asshole, get out of the way." And I looked at him and I held up my press pass from the Afghan Ministry of Information. I said, "I have permission to be here, do you?" And he looked at me with surprise. He called back down, "Hey, Sarge, there's some Afghan down here speaking perfect American English. What's going on?" Maybe I didn't fool the Afghans, but I at least fooled the Americans. That's not always too hard to do, as we know. So that was kind of the overall focus of this particular project. This 3-minute clip will show you what that project looked like compressed into just 3 minutes. This is a montage from a documentary that we did on the whole year, and this will give you an idea of what it looked like. There will be peace, or do you believe that you'll be going back to fighting very soon?
One single bullet can reignite the old animosity to fighting might start at any time.
So behind me, just the remnants of what's happened here, a missile strike, an Israeli missile strike.
That was my house.
Where is your family? Where's your
Not
family?
here.
We need a government, we need a law and order, we need to settle all these problems. because every time you are looking, some people are dying without any reason.
Almost every family, there's at least a person abducted. If it is not abducted, there's a person who has been killed in the family.
Probably clear they don't believe there are any more survivors. Otherwise, they'd be going a little bit more delicately at this.
Where we are right now is a minefield which we're currently clearing.
In those days, everything was about war.
These are all things coming out of the closet. RPG launcher.
Obviously, the insurgents really don't like it. We take away their toys.
Is she afraid sometimes?
No, I'm not afraid.
It's very bad situation there. The very bad humanity situation there.
We are prepared to follow any order we are given by our leadership.
It's not hard for me because I think this is a just war.
So that particular event, a year of war, 367 days for me, was life-changing in a lot of ways. What I learned about conflict became really the centerpiece of everything I talk about as a journalist now, that we have been doing it wrong for a lot of years, and it's time to change the way that we do it. Why did we need to do this project? To tell those multimedia stories, to tell them in 3 dimensions, to start a dialogue about solutions, and to do it in a way that we were not censored. There was no reductive storytelling here, to commit to the truth and to learn from it. But also, as a journalist, we're not completely selfless. We're selfish. We want to learn something as well. I wanted to learn what the true cost of war really was. Why do we do it? How do we mitigate its condition if we can't change it completely? For me, there were a few lessons about backpack journalism initially, was that perhaps we could tell better stories than we had been telling when I was in network television. That backpack journalism can lead to better subject rapport because you're not coming in with a big group of people. You're coming in one-on-one. You're establishing human relationships. People live in 3 dimensions. We should report on them in this way. They're not flat. Text stories sometimes don't capture them completely. Video doesn't capture them completely. Still photographs don't capture them completely. All 3 of these things together possibly may. But juggling all of those tools, a still camera here, a multimedia camera here, trying to do them at the same time became very difficult. I was confused in the field sometimes, which camera should I use? And I finally decided that if it was singing, dancing, or exploding, I would use the video camera. And I would use the still camera to capture the human face. That would be the way that I would pull people into the website, not with a headline, but with the human face that illustrated the story. I also learned that the web is an interesting amplifier and also a transformer of that media. This particular reporting project was on the internet for the entire year. And that we were doing that specifically because we wanted to reach more young people, and we wanted to reach Americans, people that were not paying attention to what was going on in these conflicts. Yet we didn't want to ignore older audiences either. And so the project became a book and also became a documentary. It basically migrated back to traditional media as well, so it existed on both platforms. One not being better than the other, but using them all together being the strongest of all. Now I hinted at what was the larger lesson here? And the larger lesson for me was this. It revealed itself fairly quickly on the project. Both journalists and society mistakenly identify war by its smallest feature, and that's this: combat. Sometimes we can't find fighting in war. I've been to a lot of wars where you're searching for it. It doesn't happen very often because it's costly. It's costly in men and materials. It's costly in bullets and ammunition. Most people can't sustain that kind of cost, and so it doesn't happen that often. And again, it isn't the most important thing in any war, yet we focus on it, as I mentioned earlier, like mindless zombies, because it's inherently dramatic. What should we be focusing on? It's this. We should be focusing on the most long-lasting aspect of war, which is civil destruction, or dismissively, it's called collateral damage. That's a euphemism that we use for civilian casualties. What you may not realize is that in every war in history, civilians have died in greater numbers than combatants in every battle, in every in history throughout all of our lives, throughout prehistory as well. And the reason for this is that it doesn't always happen on a battlefield. Combatants may come together, slaughter each other, but the civilian destruction comes with long-term starvation, with disease, with sexual violence, with the loss of heads of household that provide for families, with displacement. In fact, what we're seeing today with families migrating from Syria into Turkey and into Europe looking for safe haven, those are civilian casualties. That's what we're seeing here. And until we begin to report on this in an accurate way, until we can find a way to tell that human story of collateral damage with the same kind of effect that we're able to tell the story of a gunfight, only then will we have really done our job. To give you an idea, in the last century alone, 200 million civilians were killed in conflict. 200 killed overall in war, but about 75% were civilians. So we have to report differently. We have to find a way to do this. I haven't found the answer yet. I'm still looking. If you figure it out, please let me know. If you like what you heard today, I have 3 books on conflict. One, The Hot Zone, which talks about all the wars that I covered initially. Things They Cannot Say talks about what it's like to go home after war, like what you heard from William Wald. And Swimming with Warlords looks at the American war in Afghanistan. If you don't like to read books, if you just want to go to the internet, kevinsitesreports.com. You can see my videos and my stories there. Sheshe.